So. So. All right. Happy fellow finders. My intention for this speech, for me personally, is sinking into a complete lack of modesty. Modesty. Völlige Abwesenheit von Bescheidenheit. And the one reason that you see is this position up here. The second is the title of the talk, which is not smaller than Awakening in the 21st Century. And in order to help you get over the shock, we will play a piece of music now, which for me has a twofold meaning. The one is a political, if you like, and the other one is a deeply spiritual, because I think it is about, or can be heard as, read as, farewell to the egotistic self. And the main angle of this talk is really that there is an absolutely fundamental connection between the way that the self is constructed in our world and the state the world is in. So now we hear a song, and as I said, it has a political dimension to it, but I hear it rather as goodbye to the self, or the egotistic self.
You'll never get love by force. The truth will always take its course. Some people really have no shame. It's just an illness with a name. We were having too much fun, drinking coffees in the sun. Someone wanted to be king, came and fucked up everything. Goodbye, my dictator, goodbye. 'Cause everybody knows it's time. You've had more than your share of pie. Goodbye, my dictator, goodbye. It's hard for most to understand that good intentions not all have. Why must we always stand on guard when there is love and there is art? We were having too much fun, drinking coffees in the sun. Yesterday life was divine, but now we're going back in time. So goodbye, my dictator, goodbye. 'Cause everybody knows it's time. You've had more than your share of pie. Goodbye, my tormentor, goodbye. Goodbye, my dictator, goodbye. 'Cause everybody's sick and tired. We'll all be dancing when you die. Goodbye, my dictator, goodbye.
So we are all sick and tired. Yeah. While we are in fundamental well-being and we are so happy, if we look to the political scene and the crazy theater that's going on, that makes you sick and tired, so you don't look there anymore, right? But we have to make some sense of what's going on around us in the world, because enlightened as you may be, you live in this world. And I think most of us have made the experience that the inner peace does not automatically lead to peace in the world. You know? So a few years ago, I was realizing that they don't understand the world anymore that they live in. Which for me, you know, I used to be a Marxist in my youth, and when I was 22, I was in this state of absolute truth. I know everything, and everybody else is an idiot, just I know the truth. I have lost that long ago, but to have some understanding of the world that I live in, I always found quite, you know, an important thing to as a basis to operate. And I understood I don't grasp it anymore. There's so many complex things going on at the same time, and most of them, you know, have a basis in technology which I have no clue about or whatever. Yeah. So I read a number of books, hard theory books, and I don't want to, you know, go too much into all of them, but that's helped me to understand a few contours of what is happening around us. And I want to start with a quote that is going around on the internet a lot. It is said to be by the Italian Marxist and revolutionary Antonio Gramsci. The old world is dying, and the new world struggles to be born. Now is the time of monsters. And I think that grasps very neatly, you know, the time that we are in. I mean, you look at these old political systems and their representatives, and you think, I mean, particularly when you look at the US at the moment, how weird and old and dumb and corrupt can you even be to rise to these levels of power, and who has power and so on. But the new world is also developing. I mean, you can have beautiful hours on YouTube if you don't Google for, you know, crazy, famous, old, white, corrupt people. But for example, if you search for reforestation or permaculture, and you can see how, you know, the technology and the practical wisdom is absolutely there to turn deserts green. And people do that, and they do that at large. I don't know if any of you has heard about the ocean cleanup project. Yeah, we have this massive plastic crisis practically in all water systems and in all natural waters and so on. And there's this guy from the Netherlands, and he was diving, snorkeling, and he was shocked by how much plastic was swimming around there. So he founded a non-profit, the Ocean Cleanup Project, and they have now a system after 2-3 years of preparation, very meticulously, they're very, very professional. And it's basically 2 ships and a long arc connecting the two, going over, you know, 1.5 miles actually. And they go through the oceans and they collect the plastic, they put it on ships, they bring it back, and so on. So this is happening at the same time. It's not that it's all, you know, it's not all Gaza. It's not all Ukraine. There's, you know, terrible things happening in the world. We're all conscious about that. But the new world is also there already. And when I look at what could be an alternative to this, you know, terrible and really often very childish theater that we see on that stage. So what can it be? Is it the old left? I mean, rather not. When you think, you know, how much separated they are from themselves, how they deal with each other. But we clearly need any kind of network or structure that is grown. You cannot, in a situation like this, which is really jumping from crisis to crisis and the transition is underway, come up with something completely new. It's 5 of us and we start now to build this. This is not, we don't have the time to do that. So, but when I look at where is something that is really a grown structure over decades, over centuries really, that has a potential to shape the new world, then this global scene or movement or whatever you want to call it of awakening is the closest thing I can think of. Now, when we speak about Germany, I mean, the introduction of Eastern thought in the German discourse was happening somewhere with Goethe in the beginning, in the 18th century, then with Schopenhauer in the 1870s, and then you had the 20s. You know, Richard Wagner wanted to write an opera about the Buddha. I mean, thank God he didn't do that. I mean, it would have been a 12-hour terrible piece of musical terrorism. But then you had the 20s, you had Hermann Hesse and so on, then you had obviously fascism, but then you had the 60s. And when I look at Germany today, I mean, we have so many projects that are already deriving from the 60s. So something has built up. Now we have this link with neuroscience and all this coming together. And there's a number of caveats to be made, I think, about particularly this marriage of high technology and awakening. But generally, there is something that could turn us into a better direction. Now, I'm from my background a historian, and I studied Anglo-American history as my major, Japan studies, and medieval and recent history. And I was in Tokyo at Sophia University and studied about international relations and the history of diplomacy, which is something that has diplomacy, practically no contemporary application. When you look at how people deal with each other, I mean, there's hardly anybody on the stage. There's no Nelson Mandela. There's no Willy Brandt. There's not one person with any kind of personal credibility who would act as a bridge builder, who had the moral authority to do that. However, then I got a map, a school map, as a present from a friend of mine who is a teacher. And there's 8 maps on this map. And it depicts the history of Europe in the last 1,000 years. And it's 8 maps from 800 to 1918. And you see, most spectacular things happening. Germany and France being one thing at one point. Poland coming into existence at one point, getting really, really large, and then in 1815, it's suddenly gone. Now, when you look at this history of 1,000 years in Europe, and Europe certainly is a particularly violent place in that sense, but you see a history of war and of, terrible things happening. But now, first of all, I think it's important to see that this is not all the history, because, there was a beautiful spring day, even in Germany in 1941. And even people in concentration camps who survived, like Viktor Frankl, how could you survive? Well, he somehow managed to find some things to sink into that were giving some sense of beauty. I mean, absurdly terrible situation enough. But then I thought, what is the reason for all these wars, for example, for this violence? In my Marxist youth, it was very clear. It's class society, it's capitalism, so world revolution under my personal leadership, very easy. And then, everlasting peace on earth. But when you look over the long arc of history, you can see that there's all kinds of political systems, cultural surroundings, ideologies, religions, whatever, agricultural societies, modern societies, who do not get rid of this cancerous infection with war. So what then is the common ground? What is the common denominator in all these wars, in all these ages? And it is, in the end, the human condition. It is the way that we are organizing our consciousness. And in the end, it is separation. You see, when I was living in the cities and I was an activist, the Nazi, the fascist, was practically a dark spot in a crowd of dark spots that you never touched, never reached, because there were lines of riot police in between. Now, living in a little village like that, the young fascist sometimes is the cousin of a neighbor. So you get round to know these people. And what I would say is, obviously, the ideology is terrible and all that, and sometimes you have people who are really severely infected by hatred. But what is absolutely clear to me is they want to belong. The main source of pain is not belonging. There is a documentary now about this area, and I'm interviewed, and our leading neo-Nazis interviewed. And whenever he talks about when he's excluded from things, you can see how he trembles. That makes him really, that's the humiliation. This is not to say that we should derive any kind of political strategy from this. Yeah, this is a more detailed discussion, and this is not the topic for today. But what we can see is that the main reason for all this escalation in the end, in the human condition, is exactly the thing that we try to overcome and to solve. It is separation. Separation from yourself, separation from the world, separation from other people, separation from your pain that you split off, then you find some scapegoat and attack him instead of your own pain, and all this stupid game that we all know in probably the larger parts of our own lives and see all around the world. Now, so I'm not, want to come into some kind of utopian speculation. I mean, is a global awakening even possible? I have no clue, and I will not make any big points about it. But I think one thing that is really important to grasp is, in the end, normal people are all right. They may be cowards. Most of them are a little bit, coward and stuff. But I hardly meet people who say, yes, I want to start a new world war. Yes, I want to gas millions of people. This is not the condition that people, even if they're frustrated and so on, are in normally. And when you think about how people turn into human monsters, then Patrick was yesterday in his talk giving some hints to it. But then on the other hand, Patrick his mother can treat 25 people a year. How many complexly and severely traumatized people are produced every day all around the world? So how can we scale that up? Now, I want to go back for a moment into prehistory, if you allow. I read this book, The Dawn of Everything, by David Graeber and David Wengrow. And it's very important to understand that there's so much discussion about the human nature, human condition, how are we humans? Humans are good, humans are evil. Now, first of all, we have to understand that the human that we deal with today is a very, very, very recent appearance in human history. We are talking about 3 million years of prehistory, where things were completely different. These hunter and gatherer societies, as they are called, were not these primitive half apes that they are presented as. They were highly complex organizations, and they were very consciously deciding about how to organize their society. Then the story normally goes, first you have hunter and gatherer societies, then you have the agricultural revolution. People start to build settlements, and then they start to build cities, and then we go down the wrong direction with class society and kings and wars and so on. The fact of the matter is that the early cities for a long, long time were not ruled by dictators. Like Uruk, in the German language, Urzeit, Uropa, the great grandfather is the Uropa. Ur is for us the prefix for something very, very ancient. Now, Uruk in Mesopotamia is always presented as the example for a city turns into kingdom. The truth of the matter is that for 700 years, there is no evidence whatsoever of any kind of rule or centralized authority in Uruk. But there were city assemblies in this district and that district and so on. There was basically a very highly developed political culture. That is also true for the Ukraine, where there was a high civilization where we have practically only archaeological evidence for. But when you look at these cities, there is no central palace, there is no central temple, but there is a very, very, the city is a big circle, and it's like, in a way, it is arranged very, very down-to-earth, democratic. People communicate with people. The same is true for Southeast Asia, and that is particularly interesting for us in this context as Consider the social milieu from which Buddhist monasteries or sangha arose. The word sangha was actually first used for the popular assemblies that governed many South Asian cities in the Buddha's lifetime, roughly the 5th century. And early Buddhist texts insist that the Buddha was himself inspired by the example of these republics. You know, this is a completely different idea of our past, basically. It was not all dictatorship, all war, all this, all that. There is evidence for societies that had been centralized. There had been a dictatorial class of warriors, of priests, of whatever. And then something happened, and you can show in the artifacts of the city how the big palace was destroyed and the big temple was going away, and there were little temples and little assembly halls all over the city. So I just say this in order to open our minds for what is really possible, because it has been possible in the past. Now, the state of the world we live in, I mean, there's a number of things that are easily to see. The Western Empire is going down, and it is overall a good thing. This is not to say that China is a fantastic alternative or that Putin is great, but that the Western imperial project is coming to an end, is celebrated all over the world, except in the West. Everybody else thinks it is a very, very good thing that the Western Empire is not in this position anymore, because it was, you know, we don't have to talk about colonial history and stuff, I guess. So the Western Empire is going down. You have not only China rising, but you have India, you have the formerly developing countries who have developed by now. So we are getting a multipolar world. Now, how is this multipolar world ruled? Well, at the moment, mostly by a permanent global civil war. There's permanent violence here and there, and there's always somebody pushing in weapons in from behind and keeping the conflicts in the flames going. That's practically the situation that we have. And we have inside most societies an extreme polarization between hostile camps. And now naturally, for each of you, for me and so on, you have parts of this polarization that are closer to your beliefs and further away. But I think now when it comes to the question, how can we position ourselves as peaceful people in this environment? The crucial question is, how do you position yourself outside of this dynamic of escalation? How do you not become part of the polarization? This is not to say that you should not vote or you do whatever you like. That's not the point. But the problem of polarization is the main problem in itself, because it effects separation. It enforces separation. It closes all doors towards healing. So obviously it is difficult to do that, particularly when conflict is coming to your home. Now, I want to give you a very trivial example, but I was living in St. Pauli once. It's in Hamburg, the harbor district. And I was coming down, and there was a fist fight going on in my street. Two people, and the one already had won, apparently, and the other guy was on his knee. And the winner was still, latching it. And I said to myself, what shall I do? And I was there with a young politician, social democrat. And for him, the thing was clear. No, we keep away, we do nothing, like this. The police shall do that, and so on. So for me, that was not an option, but I also didn't want to get into the fist fight myself. So I, with a broad smile, jubilantly, I went to the winner, shook his hand and said, wow, I watched you, finishing him off. That was really cool, and so on, and fantastic, but now you see this loser, he's on his knees. Come on, so I ended the situation. Not maybe in the most, clean, pure ways, but it stopped the situation, and people who had gathered around were quite surprised by this. Now, in order to keep out of the polarization which is happening within the old, neither Trump nor Biden appear particularly new to me. So if you want to be part of the new world rising, which it does, it's important to understand some contours of the new world that we can see already. And I don't think it will be a fantastic utopia, but it will be different. Now, here's this book, the Futurica Trilogy by Alexander Barth and Jan Söderqvist. It was written almost 14, 15 years ago now, but still very, very good. What they practically say is, we are in a transformation that you can compare with the bourgeois revolution, yeah, when feudalism went away, or agricultural revolution. So everything in society is transformed. So they believe that the new class society that we are entering in will be split between the consummariat and the netocracy. The netocracy is the people controlling the networks. And they practically produce desire. They produce what people think they need. And you can be frequently surprised by what people think they urgently need, and they go out and buy it and so on. But who is producing these ideas? It's not themselves. So the consummariat is in a relatively passive position. And where the consummariat's money for consumption is coming from is really not that important in the end, as long as they consume. If they work, if they don't work, it's not that important, as long as they consume. And then netocracy is on top of this and has the reach to reach billions, if they like. And this is obviously a source of massive power. This means that none of the old public institutions from the old paradigm has in the long term any prospect at all of successfully competing in a developed network market where fingertip sensitivity, intuition, stylistic consciousness, excellent social skills will be more in demand than anything else. One consequence of this development is that the most sought after and therefore most valuable information of all on the net is that which concerns networking itself. How to construct and administer your network in the most intelligent way. This means in turn that the most powerful network of all is the meta network, where the curators cement contacts with, learn from, and enter into alliances with each other. So this is, I think, at least a very apt description of what is happening. But there is a positive and constructive side to it, and I don't have the book with me because I read it in German, and it's by Antonio Negri and Michael Hart. It's a 4-volume work. The first edition is Empire, the second is Multitude, the third is Commonwealth, and the fourth is Assembly. And the basic idea centers around the idea of immaterial labor. So in the industrial age, material labor was really what produced wealth. Material labor has a certain way to organize society. Like 40,000 male workers running into the factory when the siren goes, doing their job, speaking little, not very well educated people. The siren goes, 40,000 people march out again. They live in the working class districts, they vote for working class parties, they sing working class songs, like that. Immaterial labor is a completely different set of organization that's coming out of it. First of all, you need educated people, you need communicative people. Even if you work today at Mercedes-Benz, it is important that you take part in the teamwork, in the solution of problems. You cannot just, work your material manual stuff and that's it. Very few people can do that, and they are, basically on the way of dying out. And immaterial labor is not only producing products, immaterial products. People pay with real money for a sword, which is a virtual sword for a computer game. But that is a real economic transaction, even if you think, why do people do that? But they do it. But immaterial labor also produces social relations. And unlike material labor, which was very top-down, very big units, very centralized, immaterial labor is not centralized. It's small units. The essence of immaterial labor is cooperation. And this is not to say that this will automatically lead to a beautiful world. Because when you look at, for example, Trumpism, it's also organized in a style of a network. Yeah? Not a network we like, but there is a chance to produce other things. Produce happiness. Produce silence. So how can we do that? And there is real successes happening too, which we tend to overlook. Apartheid in South Africa, whatever the situation in South Africa today, but it was overcome. Gay marriage, who would have thought that this is, running through the world? 2 weeks ago in Thailand, it was introduced. Weed and psychedelics to be legalized is, for anybody who was part of this discussion, a major victory. Human rights in general have a much, much, much higher position now than they had 100 years ago. Now, in the end, the question for all of us is really what position we want to take and how do we envision ourselves within history. And I have really said farewell to any idea of personal success in this. My main objects of political activism were fight against fascism, fight against wars. When I look at the world today, I don't think I was particularly successful with this. Yeah. But first of all, you never know. And then the question is in which way the world would have developed if nobody would have organized these things. You don't know. And now finally, dramatic things are quite possible. When you look at the shift from the time before Reformation, yeah, the power of the church, the idea that the sun is not circling around the world was a reason to be burned to death, like that. And then within the turn of 1-2 centuries, the whole thing shifts completely, and it's really transforming in a completely different direction. Now, what I would propose is that the whole agony of the political systems we see at the moment has the reason that we are practically running around with a political system from the Industrial Revolution in a time that has surpassed industrial age already. That's an idea by Marx, that there has to be some equivalency between how is production organized and how is society organized. You cannot have a situation, if you have an agricultural situation, all people living in little villages, you can do this with feudalism, with a king. But you cannot have an explosion of cities, industrial revolution, and feudalism is remaining on top unchanged. So what we have now is the base of how society is organized already has transformed and transforming massively. The political structure has changed nothing. It's the same structure 200 years ago. So the question is, will there be a moment where we invent something, where a new way of organizing society is happening? And this is utopian, but it's utopian as it has happened in society before. The idea that democracy could be extended to a national state of the size of France was laughable in the 18th century. People said, you can do it in a city like in Athens with many slaves. But in a modern society in Paris and France, forget it. Democracy is for small-scale things. So they reinvented democracy. Then they had representative democracy. So maybe we invent something too. We, I don't mean us. I mean the people, which you don't see. And I want to come to an end with a beautiful quote from Hermann Hesse, The Glassbed Game, because it encapsulates that we have to lower our view. We have the tendency, and all media is doing this, to look up. And then you see, like in a tennis game, Trump, Biden, Trump. And in the end, it's a stupid perspective to have. Really, let us rather have the perspective of a gardener, looking down, like this. Looking what's happening on our level, normal people. And the first thing you will find out is normal people are all right. They are not nasty. They don't want. Some people are, sometimes it's weakness. But it's not that they're also evil. Look down and you will see how much cooperation is happening already. It is not war all the time. Look at your families. Look at your circle of friends. How people help each other. How normal it is to help each other. Look at, Theo and his wife. How beautiful it is to see you together. Because this is just not war, selfishness, all this. And this is happening permanently. And we don't see it. If you look up and there's war and there's this and craziness and election campaigns. And if you look down, you will see that there is a lot of basis for different kind of decision making too. You know, many families are very good at that. Other families are terrible at that. Okay. There's whole districts who do it in a different way. In India, there is the river revolution, where villages, and it's now thousands of villages, have come together and they have practically made rivers who have dried out flow again. I mean, that's a state of flow that is quite, a progress. This cooperation, village to village cooperation. And once the first river starts flowing again and the other villages see, oh my God, they have a river again, we don't. You can scale it up. And we have to scale it up if we want to, avoid disaster. Realistically, we will not avoid all disasters, but we can make very, very beautiful things happening. Like the ocean cleanup project, if they have, I think, 15 of the systems in the ocean that they have now one of, the oceans will be rid of plastics within, I think, 5 years. I mean, this is an incredible task to do this. The oceans, you might think how big it is. And one guy, Florian Slat is his name, from the Netherlands, started this. And people thought it's a great idea, and they volunteer, and scientists, and so on. I mean, it is quite possible to repair the world also. And in the same way that there is an equivalency between separation in politics and separation in the human condition, it's the same with healing, with trauma healing, and so on. Collective trauma, trauma in society. I mean, when you're talking about a place like Germany, what kind of massive burden of trauma are we carrying around with us? So it is quite possible then also to have a chain of infection, not of the negative. We all see that, yeah, how negative things can spread through society. Why not positive things? Why not a collective dynamic that's encouraging people? I mean, Florian here and I, we come in both from the same political background of revolutionary left-wing politics, so we were very unhappy people. Because we were fighting all the time on the outside. It took me a long time to understand that the war is within myself. So then Patrick, who is an old friend of mine, told me about the 45 days course. I did the 45 days course. Florian saw from afar, something has changed with this Florian. He's not like before. He asked me, we talked about meditation. He did the 45 days course. And, I don't want to overstate this, but it is quite possible that the example of one person stopping to smoke encourages other people to say, well, then I can stop smoking too. Like this, right? Now, is there any time scale on anything? Is there any guaranteed outcome? No, there is not. Forget about this. We have no clue what's coming in future. There's absolutely no point in predicting things and so on. And I think it's very helpful if we take a different perspective upon history and our role within it. And that is, again, moving away from great men, but also have a different time scale. So this is from Hermann Hesse. And there is a figure in this novel, The Glassbed Game, which is a perfect book for these days. And there's Father Jacobus. He's a monk and a historian of the Benedictine order. And he says, great men are to youth like the raisins in the cake of world history. They are also part of its actual substance, of course. And it is not so simple and easy as might be thought to distinguish the really great men from the pseudo-greats. Among the latter, it is the historical moment itself and the ability to foresee its coming and seize it that gives them the semblance of greatness. Quite a few historians and biographers, to say nothing of journalists, consider this ability to seize upon a historical moment, in other words, temporary success, as in itself a mark of greatness. The corporal who becomes a dictator overnight. That's the fancy history of great men. I rather love, and I'm insatiably curious about such phenomena as our congregation. It's here speaking in this particular instance about the Order of the Benedicts. For it is one of those long-lived organizations whose purpose is to gather, educate, and reshape man's minds and souls, to make a nobility of them, not by eugenics, not by blood, but by the spirit. A nobility as capable of serving as of ruling. In Greek history, I was fascinated not by the galaxy of heroes and not by the obtrusive shouting in the agora, but by the efforts such as those of the Pythagorean Brotherhood or the Platonic Academy. In Chinese history, no other feature is so striking as the longevity of the Confucian system. And in our own Occidental history, the Christian church and the orders which serve it as part of its structure seem to me historical elements of the foremost importance. The fact that an adventurer contrives to conquer or found a kingdom which lasts 20, 50, or even 100 years, or that a well-meaning idealist on a royal or imperial throne once in a while brings greater honesty into politics, or attempts to carry some visionary cultural project to fruition, that under high pressure a nation or other community has been capable of incredible feats of achievement and suffering, all that interests me far less than the ever recurrent efforts to establish such organizations as our order, and that some of these efforts have endured for 1,000 or 2,000 years. This is, for me, the most remarkable and meritorious phenomenon in history. So now, how happy do you think the Chinese are with the idea to kick the Dalai Lama out these days? I mean, in the end, for Tibet, it was a great loss. For the spread of Buddhism in the West and all over the world, it was massively impactful. You have a guy somewhere in India 2,500 years ago, he has, an awakening, he has followed for 2,500 years. These Buddhists, unlike the Christians, not with so much bloodshed, spread the word. And now it's all over the world. My stepmother started yoga classes 30 years ago, and it was in Bavaria, and it was a scandalous thing to do, yoga. I mean, it was some kind of Satanism or whatever, And now it's all over the place. So we have made enormous steps, and we know how to cure people. We know how to cure ourselves. I think there's not one person in this room who could not say, I have experienced real healing. And this is possible, but this is the perspective. And whether that takes 10 years or 10,000 years is absolutely not for us, to predict or so. But the question is where to position ourselves. And I'm sometimes shocked, I must say, about spiritual people who are talking about ahimsa and peace and everything. And then comes a war and their national state is involved, and suddenly the others are the terrible fascists, always the others, obviously. And then we have to send weapons, have to do this and that. And I said, well, no, we have to keep out of this escalation. Somebody has to do that job to raise the flag of having no flag, practically. And there is a huge market for this too. Because it is, I find for many people, it drives you crazy how they fight with each other all the time. So we are not in a bad situation when it comes to the possibilities that we have developed as a tradition, so to speak. I'm not interested in founding churches or orders. Well, it's not my church, actually. That's, but we have no active Christianity in Weitersroda anymore, so I can speak with them. Maybe they sell it to me. No, but really to come to an end, hope is also sometimes difficult emotion to have. in Faust, second part by Goethe. Hope is the sister of sorrow. So I try to stay out of that game by now. You know, I hope everything will be great. Oh, I'm so worried everything will be terrible. I just look at my personal impact. I start here. Oh, yeah. I end there, and with this I can operate. And this is my impact in this life. And you know, then we'll see where we get. Speaking about churches, there's also obviously also an economic side to it. So I just want to reveal to you at that point that 20% of all the meditation energy that you have produced will be directly transferred to my karma account. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. All right. If you want to have some Q&A at that point, we can still do that for 10, 15 minutes. So, yeah. Let's walk around? Yes, let's walk around. It's much better. Okay.